Hello and welcome to this very special podcast by the NUJS Legal Aid Society on the World Day of Social Justice, that is February 20th. The theme for this year is renewed commitment to social development and social justice, echoing the Doha Political Declaration adopted last year. And I'm Ankita Chakraborty, Assistant Professor of Sociology at NUJS Kolkata, and I'm one of the hosts for the podcast today. So this is the first in a series of podcasts that we have planned at by NUJS Legal Aid Society, and we'll be organizing these throughout the year. And today seemed like the best day really to start this off with the World Social Justice Day being held today. So we have three very amazing guests today with us who will be joining us. I'll start with Professor Saurabh Bhattacharjee, who is an associate professor of law at NLS Bangalore. He's also a former faculty member of NUJS Kolkata and an expert on labor law, sports law, refugee law, nuclear law, impoverishment law, and so on. Our second guest joining us today is Professor Ruchira Goswami, Associate Professor at NUJS Kolkata and an expert on gender rights, child rights, film and law, and of course, sociology. And finally, we have our very own faculty advisor of NUJS Legal Aid Society, Professor Sarfaraz Ahmed Khan, who is a professor at NUJS and an expert in criminal justice, human rights law, and also the chief driving force behind the podcast today. So welcome again to all of you. Joining me today is our student convener, Aniket Amarnath. And basically, we'll be starting today's podcast off with a quick intro into what is meant by social justice. So if I can just point out the meaning of social justice as per the ILO, which goes like this, that all human beings, irrespective of race, creed, or sex, have the right to pursue both their material well-being and their spiritual development in conditions of freedom and dignity, of economic security and equal opportunity. Right? And this year, like I said, at the Doha Declaration, member states have specifically underscored that poverty eradication, full and productive employment, and decent work for all, as well as social inclusion, are the major interrelated pillars of social development. Right? On that note, I will hand the mic over to Aniket, and then we start the ball rolling. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, ma'am. So, as ma'am has said, my name is Aniket Amarnath. I'm the convener of the Legal Aid Society here at NUJS. So, before we begin, I'd just like to talk about how World Social Justice Day kind of came about, right? Now, World Social Justice Day came about after the Copenhagen Declaration in 1995, which essentially seeks to put people at the center of development goals, right? Which is why it's so great that we have an equal mix of sociology professors and, legal faculty. So it was set up by the UN in 2007 and was first celebrated in 2009. And as ma'am has already said, this year's theme is about a renewed commitment to social justice. So ma'am, over to you to explain how exactly we put people at the center of tackling problems.
Right. So what I think we really need to sort of start off with is obviously get into the, like Aniket pointed out, the fact that the ILO has been deeply involved in the whole celebration of or marking of this day as the World Social Justice Day. And Saurabh, if I can start with you. So how, in your view, since you are an expert on labor law, so how do labor laws essentially anchor the whole concept of social justice?
Thank you, Ankita, for that introduction. When I look at social justice as a concept, I think the pillars that the Doha Declaration speaks of itself signifies the importance of labor within the social justice agenda, because among the pillars we have decent work for all, we have full and productive employment, along with poverty eradication and social inclusion. And if you have to recognize that social and economic justice is intimately connected with work as a site of livelihood, as a site of economic redistribution, then labor laws become a very integral part of our policy as well as legal commitment and of course social commitment and a political commitment to social justice. And this is very well exemplified in the Indian constitutional framework as well. As we all know, the preamble speaks of justice, social, economic, and political as one of the foundational values of our constitution. And the transformative agenda that our constitution promised the country spoke of labor protection as one of the key items. When we look through the directive principles of state policies, as many as 5 to 6 different directive principles directly or indirectly are connected with labor. We have fundamental rights which are directly about protection of workers, whether it's prohibition on child labor, whether it's prohibition of bonded labor and forced labor and trafficking in all other forms. Ordinarily, fundamental rights of protection that state is guaranteeing against actions of state agents, whereas the Indian Constitution explicitly went into not just, of course, protection against untouchability, but also prohibition of child labor, prohibition of forced labor, recognizing that basic liberty and fundamental rights cannot be solely directed at state, but must also target exploitation that emanates from private behavior. But to take this forward, while the Constitution provided us the broad vision of what social and political transformation in independent India would look like, when we look at 21st century workplace, we must recognize that on one hand, work has been the site of injustice historically. Therefore, protection of vulnerable groups, social inclusion, decent work means that there must be an expansive agenda of labor standards that protects workers from depredation of capital, that ensures that even as workers sell their labor, they are not commodified by the logic of market. But also, very importantly, that development cannot be divorced from social justice. Development cannot be divorced from protection of the very most vulnerable groups for whom development is targeted at. And specifically, I'd like to talk about 3 major challenges that we have at this moment when we speak about labor protection in 2026. One, universally, but even more so in India, there are many groups of workers who are excluded from labor protection altogether. There's plenty of work that is documented that as much as 90% of workforce in India is outside the ambit of traditional labor laws. And even where there are laws that do apply to formal sector establishments, there are several categories of what we call as atypical workers, even within formal sector establishments, who don't have the same protection as other workers. So the whole debate on contractual labor within public sector employment, concerns about casual labor, ad hoc labor must be foregrounded if we have to recognize labor protection for workers all across the board. But even more importantly, there are newer forms of work that are emerging. Most of our labor standards that were designed in the early 20th century to mid 20th century were designed keeping in mind a certain industrial factory model of production. Now, some might say that it was never archetypal Indian worker who fit within the factory mold of production, but even more so at this juncture, because with newer forms of work like platform work, with other forms of digital labor, and newer forms of labor arrangements that have developed with technology, in some way, the challenge of extending labor protection and universalizing labor protection has become even more pertinent. I must admit that all around the world, there have been some changes that have taken place. If you look at state level legislations in India, there are many states which have begun with laws on platform work. At the European level, we have a platform work directive. ILO is contemplating a convention with respect to platform work. But I don't think it's only about platform work. There are several forms of work that are emerging which the umbrella category of platform work may not even adequately capture. So then how do we ensure that the factory model of production around which labor laws were built, how do we try and adapt and recalibrate them for the realities of 21st century, where factory model of production may be at the margins rather than being the quintessential form of labor arrangement needs to be addressed. And perhaps even equal a challenge is what technological changes are doing to the existing labor laws. To give you one example, most countries around the world have laws protecting workers against retrenchment. Most countries have some form of occupational safety and health laws. They may have severe gaps, they may be inadequate, but at least a semblance of occupational safety laws we have in most industrialized democracies. But the nature of occupational safety challenges are very different in a world where algorithm and other forms of artificial intelligence have become the entity exercising control over workers. So what kind of privacy protection we talk about, what kind of algorithmic transparency do we talk about, needs to be addressed. In an age of AI where the fear is that a vast number of workers would lose jobs, what do we do in terms of unemployment allowances? What do we do in terms of the existing unemployment protection laws or job termination protection laws that we have, or even stronger social security instruments? Requires a very serious rethinking and reconfiguration. There have been proposals on universal basic income. There have also been proposals in fleshing out what algorithmic transparency means, what occupational safety would mean in today's age. So when people are talking about right to disconnect, when people are talking about ergonomic adjustments in the workplaces, many of these were not within the conversation on occupational safety 50 years back. But now these are the challenges that we'll have to address in a head-on manner. While one can speak on and on about the difficulties that technological changes and changes in the labor economy are bringing for labor standards, but I think all of these foreground the main question that we'll have to deal with. How do we ensure that labor standards remain relevant in ensuring decent work for one and all, not just for a labor aristocracy, but for every category of worker? But also, how do we ensure that the labor standards are enforced in a meaningful manner? And that takes us to the other question, and probably on the point at which I end. Labor laws historically have largely looked at the conflict between the working class and the big business. But the workspace is not characterized by that one single contradiction. There are questions of gender that comes in, and trade unions, instead of being seen as instrument of protection, may actually be seen as instrument of abuse, given the gender-based harassment that women workers may face. We've even had an example of a case going all the way up to the Supreme Court on how a trade union did not allow women to become its members. So whether it's gender, whether it's caste, whether it's ethnicity, there are several other variables that animate and shape workplace experience, and labor laws must try and reconfigure themselves to ensure that those axes of discrimination and exclusion are also covered in a reasonably robust manner. But it also takes us to the broader question of how social justice itself must be seen through an intersectional lens, and not just purely through the prism of labor protection, as much as labor protection is one of the central pillars. So with that, I'd like to end.
Right. Thank you so much, Saurabh. That was enlightening as usual. And I would actually like to take up on your question and throw that to Ruchira ma'am, because essentially we start off with the hook of the International Labour Organization and labor as the entry point into social justice, but then it is a very expansive concept, right? And there are so many aspects to it, and who better than Ruchira ma'am to enlighten us a little bit about this entire notion of social justice in its entirety, right? And particularly the kind of inequality that Saurabh has also referred to in his speech that we are now beset with, right? So how do you really sort of talk about the relevance of social justice even in contemporary times, right?
Thank you, Ankita, and thank you for this opportunity, Legal Aid Society. I mean, the concept of social justice is so broad, I don't think we'd be able to encompass the breadth of it in a short discussion. But if we look at certain concepts that has evolved over time, and we can start with the Doyen Rawls and his idea of distributive justice, that resources need to be distributed fairly, equally, equitably. So the first idea was that of resource redistribution, which he calls distributive and redistributive justice. And alongside the idea of procedural justice, how do you get that resource allocation which is spread to everybody more or less in a fair and equitable manner. But later on, especially when we were talking about gender, and we look at the works of Iris Marion Young, and she talks about social justice through a feminist lens, and she makes this point that we need to expand beyond just an equitable distribution of material resources, and social justice means the elimination of institutionalized domination and oppression. So, and so it's about changing social structures and social institutions to ensure that material goods as well as non-material goods like power, dignity, opportunity is equitably distributed, and we need to move beyond the Rawlsian idea. Just another very, very important theory would be that of Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum's idea of justice, and this link between justice as fairness, and it's not only about distribution and redistribution of resources, but the links between social justice and how they complement human capabilities and human freedoms, and how social justice is incomplete unless it ensures human capabilities, creates conditions for human capability realization, and creates human freedom. So I think, and there are many, many more versions and articulations of social justice, and I think the basic principles over time has remained the same, which is ensuring equal rights and freedom for each person. It's just not equality, but equity, which is you have to tailor make needs, resources, depending on the social, political background of the individual. One of the more important components is that of realization of human rights, and human rights would be legal rights at one level and moral rights at another level. Then it's about inclusivity, which Saurabh was already talking about, and you were also mentioning that it is about inclusive participation, and especially around, say, legal changes, policy initiatives, developmental models that any state is bringing in. Is everybody consulted? Are all stakeholders a part of what happens in the name of, say, growth, development, policies, etc.? So are we able to ensure that more or less there is a participation of multiple voices, of various voices, and of different kinds of people coming from different marginalities? I think that is very, very important. And to also realize that when we talk about gender or when we talk about caste, they don't operate in isolation as one tower of oppression. They continuously intersect with other forms of inequality. So when we are talking about gender justice, then we have to look at the class, caste, ethnicity component of, say, gender. And gender just not doesn't mean today to talk only about women. I mean, when we talk about gender, we need to talk about multiple sexualities, multiple sexual identities. We need to talk about rights of trans people. And I think all of that is encompassed within the idea of social justice today. And for me, I think talking about inclusivity, therefore, and intersectionality as two major components of social justice, I think become very important. And then we can talk a little more about gender justice. And another stakeholder that we keep on missing is to talk about children as participants to discussions around social justice, because a lot of these discussion is triggered by how adults basically decide about their lives, but what about children? Because their lives are always decided by adults. So there is a right to participation under the UNCRC. So how do children get to speak about policies and schemes and things that affect them? So that is one stakeholder which I think is very, very important, that we seem to sort of often exclude. And when we talk about, again, children, gender, sexuality, I think the other stakeholder that we have to discuss today is to talk about persons with disability. And so what does social justice mean for persons with disability? Who determines what is justice for them? And I really like that slogan that nothing about us without us. I wish there was a similar thing around children, but we haven't got there yet. So for me, as I was saying, that talking about intersectionality, inclusivity, and making everybody a stakeholder, and it is the role of the state to ensure that that is happening. I think is important. And basically, the ability of social justice also means speaking truth to power, and negotiating around that, I think. For me, at this moment, I think that is the ideal.
Thank you so much, Ruchiradi, and there's so much to unpack in that 5 minute that you spoke. But I want to include our next speaker, so I'll just pick up on a few of the ideas that Ruchiradi was speaking about. So she spoke about, sir, inequality. She spoke about human rights and intersectionality, and the structural violence that marginalized communities face, right, through institutions and through structures which are based on certain hegemonic understandings of power. So in that context, another population that, just like Ruchiradi spoke about children and about the disabled people, another population that is often forgotten is, of course, the population which is inside or incarcerated, right? And because you are part, or you are an expert on the criminal justice system and human rights, I would like to ask you today that, they are a forgotten component of the population. I mean, most often nobody really sort of is thinking about the fact that they're also people with absolutely the same rights that all of us have. So how do you think social justice conversations and policies should be reimagined to include people who have been sort of incarcerated?
Thank you for asking that question, because we always forget the people who are behind the bar. We forget the people who are in jail. And within that group also there are further marginalizations, those who are women, those who are transgender, those
Disabled.
are from the minorities groups, those who are poor, and they are more vulnerable because they cannot afford our criminal justice systems. So if really we have to achieve effective social justice systems, the day we can achieve equality, hope the things will change. But till that time, what we can do? Now, my understanding is to ensure that these people who are in prison, so some takeaway could be that how can we have not able to achieve legal aid to every one of them? Still there are cases where people are in jail for quite longer time. They cannot afford lawyer, nor they can afford some kinds of charges which require to get bail, or maybe bond which they need to submit. Many occasions people merely in the jail because they cannot submit the bail, or someone we have a provisions like earlier it was 436A, now the section number has changed, where after 1/3 of the period they can release, but people are not aware of it. Secondly, when we're talking about the prison population, it's astonishing that look, the people who are even convicted by the court can stand in an election and become MLA and MP, but the people who are under trial prisoners, they can't even give vote. If you have to improve, my impression is, if you really want to improve the condition of prisons, give voter rights to at least who are under trial prisoners, not who are convicted prisoners. Tomorrow the jail condition will improve. So their food conditions, facilities, everything will change immediately the day we allow the voting rights. Why can't we give the constitutional rights to them when they are not convicted? Particularly in a situation now, we are many hard cases we are finding where people are being booked for grievous offences, despite they are human rights activists, they are journalists, they are human rights defender, they are political opponent, and they are in jail for 4 years and 5 years. These people, why they people will not be get other kinds of a right? To our legal aid system must be effective, which to reach to them. Now, our judicial system or criminal justice system is so burdened. Many of the rights we have not able to fulfill. So, the kind of investment required from the state is not there. When we're talking about the social justice, when there's an injustice, the judiciary come into pictures. When judiciary come into pictures, we require a system under which we can ensure that the judicial systems will come for the vulnerable groups. Are we really able to reach to that level where the judicial systems able to provide services to the vulnerable groups? Answer is definitely no. Some improvements are done. So we know we have a system like paralegal volunteers who can give support. In fact, NUJS, we give training to around 300 paralegal volunteers who came from across West Bengal, all the NALSAR secretaries, etc. But these are small initiatives. It is required to be inculcated at every stage so that the services can reach to all the people who are in the jail. And interestingly, we should not forget that many times these legal systems, when they enforce partially, when they not enforce with equity, with equality, and which is apparent from many reports, for examples, in 1 or 2 years ago, Delhi CA right cases, the Minority Commission of Delhi has come up with a document which shows that how the prosecution is being taken place. So the peoples who are more victimized in the violence, there are more prosecutions against them. In West Bengal, I came across a police stations where more than 100 FIR is registered and all our wordings are same. So someone came to my home, taken away 2 bhari sona, 25,000 rupees. So almost every home has 2 bhari sona, every home has 25,000 rupees cash. And police blindly registered all FIR. So when our system, we have a system, if that system is not work properly, if they cannot check that our legal system should not be misused. So one, the legal system should be stand next to the vulnerable group. Two, legal system must provide services in such a manner so that because of inequality or because of their poverty or vulnerability, they should not deprive of the benefit of the legal systems. Three, the legal systems or functionaries should act in such a manner which will not create doubt on them of their partiality, that they are partial. So hopefully we can, the things has improved from earlier, but again many things we have to do. New criminal law has come into existence, but still what we are expecting, suppose we have to do the social justice issue, we are saying those among the women who are victimized, most of them who are vulnerable. If those are vulnerable who are victimized, why our criminal justice system will give the same kinds of protections to all vulnerable women, which otherwise some other groups are available? For to give you example, under SC/ST Atrocities Act, under section 15, these are excellent protections available to victims. Under the POCSO, the victims who are minor, they are getting excellent protection. I am not saying it's optimum, but at least some good protections are there available. If a victim who is just below 18 years will get one kind of protections, a victim who becomes just above 18 years, what take away from her that she is not entitled to same kinds of protections? So are our system really equally able to give them those kinds of protections? One of our students has done LLM dissertations recently in the last batch, and she did analysis of a POCSO cases and giving compensation in Calcutta and Saurabh Bhattacharjee. And she demonstrated by cases that one, in all those cases, none of the cases they got interim compensations. Two, in the cases where they get compensations, there's a huge difference. It's become all subject to that judges who are sitting there. So in the same circumstances, one judge may give 4 lakh rupees compensation, while other judge give 50,000 rupees compensation. When someone is a victim, when we're talking about the social justice, every step our system must equally recognize their need as a rights, and then ensure that those rights are achievable. It must reach to the victim. So hope within criminal justice systems also we can achieve that equality. Nowadays everything we get some report. So there's an Indian justice report and they will give the idea where we stand, and really we really able to achieve the level. Where is the law says that the statement by the magistrate should be recorded by a female. How many female judges are there? Luckily nowadays a large number of female judges are coming, but not in every places. In the police stations, now something we do for the social justice, for example, we make women police stations. Very good. But why can't mainstreaming of women that every police station there should be a women police officer? Now why it become counterproductive? Let me give you an example. If someone living in a Sundarban area and if she have to register an FIR, if he is a victim is the male, he can go to local police station which is 5 kilometers away. If a victim is a female, she has to come to headquarters of a district which is 50 kilometers or 80 kilometers away. So when you make something, apparently we say for social justice, ensuring the access to justice to the women, but on counterproductive, they are depriving them from accessing the benefit. So we need to look at it every level, that are we really providing equal justice to everyone, be it women, be it children, be it other vulnerable group, be it minorities group, be it the peoples who are in the prisons, and then only we can look into, we can hope that the social justice target will be achieved.
So I think Safra sir, also thank you so much for that. quite a few radical thoughts there, but also sort of basically echoing a lot of what Amartya Sen has also spoken about in terms of how we can sort of actually make social justice a reality. Now, I want to ask our student convener, sorry, to basically address whatever questions he has, and then I want to take up another line of questioning, which will also draw upon what they've all been speaking about. So if I can just pass it on.
Fantastic. Ma'am, so first of all, thank you for asking sir the question about incarcerated prisoners. That was going to be something I was going to ask actually. But Saurabh sir, so since we are lucky enough to have you with us here today, you have written a lot about the rights of refugees. Right now, when we talk about social justice, especially when we talk about social justice in India, people who are often left out of the conversation are people who are not actually citizens, of people who are stateless, who have nowhere else to go, right? And also we have noticed in the recent past that the judiciary has made certain comments about people who have these UNHCR cards, which is the only protection they have in absence of a dedicated refugee law. Now, in the current framework, how do we exactly bring these refugees within the conversation of social justice? How do we make them stakeholders? Should they in fact be stakeholders?
The last question would be relatively easier. They must be seen as stakeholders in any conversation on social justice, because when we talk of inclusion, when we talk of empowerment, when we talk of decent work, we cannot speak of them in isolated silos. There is a political argument to be made. There's also a legal argument to be made that every individual is entitled to a baseline level of protection that in 21st century we can certainly say minimum standards of human rights protection are universal regardless of your national status. But there's also a political argument to be made that if you have a vast underclass of completely excluded persons, that may also have serious repercussions on social harmony, that will have serious repercussions also on economic progress that a particular region or a country may have. So if you are going to talk about ensuring that minimum standards are guaranteed, there can be differentiation on the basis of national status, but to say that we'll have a group of persons who are stateless, would not be provided any legal recognition, any legal rights, is a travesty and is also in violation of India's international obligations, and I would say also in violation of India's constitutional obligations, because when we look at right to life and liberty under Article 21, that's not limited to citizens, but that's applicable to all persons. And given the expansive manner in which Indian courts have read the right to life, those entitlements, even if in a slightly more minimalistic manner, must be extended to all refugees and other asylum seekers. Having said that, I think the moment that we have has unfortunately been very regressive in the context of refugee rights. Whatever limited space was available that were created through few progressive decisions from the 80s and 90s, we have seen a rollback. And the recent remarks by the Chief Justice of India has also been unfortunate. And India has a constitutional obligation to ensure that nobody is sent back where there is a threat of persecution. India also has an international human rights obligation to ensure that minimum standards of safety and socio-economic rights are extended to every person who comes in as a refugee or as an asylum seeker. But unfortunately, the whole refugee conversation has also got tied in the broader questions about citizenship and, if I dare say so, about who constitutes the correct Indian. So in that sense, refugee rights has become an unfortunate byproduct of exclusion because of all that xenophobic conversation that we are having at this juncture. And even on citizenship, our laws have become more and more stringent, our processes have been somewhat arbitrary, and unless those are addressed, we'll have a serious crisis with respect to protection of refugees. But I belong to a family of refugees who came from East Pakistan post-independence, and I think a huge chunk of Indian, at least in Bengal, Punjab, Sindhi families are people who came in as refugees at different points of time. And I think there's a moral obligation for us also to ensure that the legal standards and the state policies we have are reasonably supportive of refugee protection.
Ruchira ma'am, Safra sir, anything you'd like to add to what Saurabh sir said?
No, I just, we have already exceeded our time limit, what we was there. But just to add one thing which pain on the refugee issue, which says, recent incident of Bengali, some families who were brought from the police from Delhi and other places, and they have sent back to Bangladesh. Now, due to intervention of judiciary, they came back. The question is not of coming back. The question is who will fix the accountability of those officers? Because that will give message that the human life is important, the constitution is important, Article 21 is everywhere, and no one, no police officer, no administration, no government, no one is above the constitution. And if they violate their constitutional right, they must be held accountable and responsible. We are failed to fulfill, fix the accountability. Till the time we fail to fix accountability of those perpetrators of these kinds of wrong or violations of human rights, the violation will continue to be taken place, and we can face injustice in the society.
On reimagining or on the refugee question, when I'm in a bad mood, I really think that this discussion is really utopian, because what we want is and the problem is that it is not utopian. I mean, then you go back to the constitution and say, oh, this sounds very utopian, economic liberty and freedom and justice, social, economic, political, and while there have been wins that we have got over the last so many years, the losses are also huge. So if we look at any national or international reports, we see the massive gap between the rich and the poor. We see enormous structural violence. And while fixing responsibility, ensuring procedural justice, what you were talking about, Sarfraz, is absolutely important, I also want to tie that up, that it is not only a question of implementation and the problem of the law in books and the law in action thing. I also think it's about the culture of human rights, because it's somehow we can still hold the state responsible, because that has been the history of human rights claims. But we also need to create what is called human rights culture. Unless we value the other person as a person having equal rights and liberty and freedom and dignity as me, I will, however much laws and policies you have, it will never translate into action. So I mean, we know this conversation that while political equality has been achieved, barring incarcerated people, persons with mental illness who have also been incarcerated, but political equality is only having one half the game. What about social and economic equality that needs to be achieved? And these were freedoms that Ambedkar and Phule and a whole lot of feminist scholars and everybody has struggled for over the years. If you're looking at the national framework, I mean, where are those dreams? I mean, I don't know, but the point is we need to keep on pushing this, because unless we keep on saying that we have to reimagine social justice, and this is not an utopian vision, it's a constitutional vision, and you just can't take it away just like that. I think we'll have to keep on reiterating.
So it's interesting. I wanted to actually, like I said, that I wanted to bring the conversation back to this point that I thought ties in with what all of you said, really, which is that, just like Ruchira said, that yes, we need a culture of human rights, right? And a human rights culture to be created and to be enlivened, right? Again, which is based on the constitutional vision. I think there's also an important emphasis that we need to place on the erosion of institutional values that have happened,
Yes, very
right?
much.
And the fact that there has been a tremendous erosion of trust in institutions, right?
Yes.
And there is a political angle to that as well. There's a very massive political angle to that. And this is true globally, I think. So I don't think it's restricted to India. But then I think this is something that needs to be crucially addressed before we can really talk about sort of, realizing social justice, as it were, right?
Yes.
So if anyone has any thoughts on this point of institutional trust, institutional values, and so on.
I would like to draw emphasis on the constitutional value of fraternity. That
Oh, yes.
whether it's the erosion of institutional trust, whether it's the erosion of respect for others, or what Ruchira said about culture of human rights. I think there has been a terrible development where people have stopped seeing other, whether they are from the other religious groups or other caste groups or other socioeconomic groups, as worthy of respect, as worthy of dignity. And I think that's something that needs to be restored, because without that trust, without that mutual respect, a society that is fully flourishing, a society that progresses, cannot really be achieved.
Yeah, that's it. We don't need to say anything else after that. That's like the final
Wonderful
conclusion
conclusion, yeah.
that Saurabh has expertly made. So I think I would like to thank all of our speakers once again, Saurabh, Ruchiradi, Satra sir and Aniket. Thank you so much for taking time out. And we know it was very last minute, but we have been very happy that you've all participated and really sort of spoken so passionately about values that are important to all of us and values that need to be important to all of us as a country as well. So thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everyone.
Ankita,
Thank you all the
for
audience
doing this.
also.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for comparing this and
Yes,
coordinating
anchoring.
this.
Lovely. Thank you.
Chalo, done.